The German lieutenant watching from his Tiger tank couldn't believe what he was seeing. His crew had just fired 6 direct hits at the Soviet T-34 charging toward them. 6 hits at 50 meters. The shells bounced off like raindrops on steel. The T-34 kept coming. He grabbed the radio and screamed into it. Nobody answered. 3 minutes later, his Tiger was burning, and he was running through a wheat field that would soon be carpeted with 1,000 wrecked tanks. This was Prokhorov. July 12, 1943. The largest tank battle in human history. But it almost didn't happen, because 18 months earlier, Adolf Hitler had dismissed the T-34 as Soviet junk. Just another example of Russian incompetence. He'd been wrong about that. Dead wrong. June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The German blitzkrieg tore into Soviet territory like a steel avalanche. 3 million men, 3,000 tanks. The Wehrmacht was unstoppable. Every general staff officer in Berlin had calculated the war would be over in 6 weeks. Stalin's regime would collapse, the Red Army would surrender, Moscow would fall. They'd prepared for Soviet T-26 light tanks. Ancient things, tin cans with tracks. The standard German 37mm anti-tank gun could punch through them at 1,000 meters. Easy kills, target practice. Then on June 23rd, day 2 of the invasion, German reconnaissance units encountered something new. Lieutenant Stupp commanded a Panzer III in the 4th Panzer Division. His tank mounted the standard 50mm gun. Excellent piece of German engineering. He'd knocked out 9 Soviet tanks that morning. Then he saw one coming through the tree line, bigger than the others, different silhouette, sloped armor, moving fast. He ordered his gunner to fire. Direct hit at 50 meters, no effect. The thing kept coming. They fired again, 20 meters, hit square on the turret. The shell ricocheted into the sky. Stupp watched it arc over his head like a tracer round. The T-34's gun traversed, fired once. Stupp's Panzer exploded. He survived, barely, burned hands, shrapnel in his leg. But he lived long enough to file a report that made its way up the chain of command. The report described a tank that shouldn't exist. Armor too thick to penetrate, sloped at angles that deflected everything the Germans could throw at it. A 76mm gun that could destroy any German tank at ranges where German guns were useless. Diesel engine that didn't catch fire like German gasoline engines. Wide tracks that could traverse mud and snow the narrow-tracked Panzers couldn't handle. The German high command dismissed it. Intelligence error, they said. The Soviets couldn't possibly have developed anything superior to German engineering. It violated every assumption they'd made. The Reich had the best tanks, the best industry, the best designers. This report had to be exaggerated. Combat stress, the fog of war. But the reports kept coming. From Army Group North, Army Group Center, Army Group South, every sector of the front. German tank crews were encountering these Soviet monsters and dying. Anti-tank gunners watched their shells bounce off harmlessly. Panzer commanders saw their entire platoons destroyed by single T-34s they couldn't kill. General Heinz Guderian, commander of Panzer Group II, saw it himself. June 26th. His advance units reported a Soviet counterattack near Grodno. Guderian drove forward to observe. He watched through binoculars as a single T-34 engaged 8 of his tanks. It destroyed 4 before withdrawing. The other 4 German tanks hadn't even damaged it. Guderian filed an urgent report to High Command. Subject line: New Soviet tank. Immediate threat assessment required. The response came back 3 days later. Continue the advance. The T-34 cannot be produced in significant numbers. Soviet industry is primitive. We face no strategic threat. They were wrong about that too. Soviet factories were already producing T-34s at a rate the Germans couldn't match. Kharkov Locomotive Factory, Stalingrad Tractor Plant, Tankograd in the Urals, where entire factories had been evacuated and rebuilt east of German bomber rain. By December 1941, the Soviets had built 1,800 T-34s. The Germans had built 400 Panzer IIIs and IVs combined. But numbers alone don't tell the story of what happened that summer. The T-34 changed everything about armored warfare. It forced the Germans to rethink every tactical doctrine they'd developed. Every engagement became a nightmare calculation. Could you get close enough to flank it? Could you coordinate artillery support? Could you avoid it entirely and find softer targets? Most German tank crews learned a simple rule. If you see a T-34, you die or you run. Wehrmacht veterans who survived 1941 spoke about it in whispers in the field hospitals. They called it the Ungeheuer, the monster, the thing that shouldn't exist but kept appearing everywhere at once, killing with impunity. One account comes from Hauptmann Werner Schmidt, a company commander in the 6th Panzer Division, July 1941, outside Smolensk. His company of 14 Panzer IIIs encountered 3 T-34s in open terrain. Perfect killing ground for German tanks. They had superior numbers, superior tactics, superior training. They fired everything they had. The T-34s closed to 200 meters and methodically destroyed 11 German tanks in 14 minutes. Schmidt survived by ordering a retreat, against regulations, against his training, but staying meant dying. He wrote in his journal that night, "We are facing tanks we cannot destroy with the weapons we possess. This is not what they told us. This is not what they promised. We are being fed into a grinder, and no one in Berlin will acknowledge it." Schmidt died at Kursk 2 years later, but his journal survived. By late summer 1941, the truth couldn't be denied anymore. Even Hitler had to face it. The Wehrmacht was winning the war, but taking catastrophic losses doing it. German tank strength was being ground down not by superior Soviet tactics or numbers alone, but by a single weapon system they hadn't anticipated. Hitler called an emergency meeting at the Wolf's Lair, August 7, 1941. Every major tank designer and armaments minister attended. The topic? How to counter the T-34. The discussion lasted 11 hours. Some advocated copying the T-34 directly. Take the design, reverse engineer it, build it in German factories. It was the fastest solution. Ferdinand Porsche argued for it. So did several frontline generals who'd seen the T-34 in action. Hitler refused. German tanks would use German engineering. He wouldn't stoop to copying Soviet designs. It would damage morale, make the Reich look weak. Instead, he ordered the development of new heavy tanks, bigger, more powerful, machines that would crush the T-34 through sheer superiority. The Panther would have sloped armor like the T-34. The Tiger would have armor too thick for the T-34 to penetrate. The Ferdinand would mount a gun that could kill at ranges the Soviets couldn't match. But these tanks wouldn't be ready until 1943. For 18 months, German tank crews fought with weapons they knew were inferior. They developed tactics to compensate, ambushes, flanking maneuvers, combined arms operations with artillery and aircraft support. They got good at it. They had to. The alternative was annihilation. The Eastern Front became a killing field of innovation. Both sides learning, both sides adapting. The Soviets learned their T-34s were mechanically unreliable. Gearboxes failed, tracks broke, crews had minimal training. A tank is only as good as the men inside it. And in 1941, Soviet crews were often sent into battle with less than 10 hours of training. The Germans learned that numbers matter. You could have the best tactics in the world, but if the enemy could replace 3 tanks for everyone you destroyed, you were still losing. The mathematics of attrition favored the Soviets. By December 1941, the attack on Moscow had stalled. German forces were exhausted, overextended, freezing in temperatures their equipment wasn't designed to handle. The T-34's diesel engine still ran in -40 degrees. German gasoline engines seized up. The Wehrmacht retreated from Moscow. First major setback of the war. Then came Stalingrad, February 1943. The 6th Army surrendered. 300,000 men lost. The entire southern wing of the German advance collapsed. Hitler needed a victory, something decisive, something that would prove German superiority was still intact. He found it on a map, a bulge in the Soviet lines near Kursk, a salient that extended deep into German-held territory. If he could pinch it off, surround the Soviet forces inside, destroy them completely, it would give Germany breathing room, time to rebuild, time to deploy the new tanks. Operation Citadel. The planning began in March 1943. 2 massive pincer movements. Field Marshal von Manstein attacking from the south with 4th Panzer Army. Field Marshal Model attacking from the north with 9th Army. They'd meet at Kursk and trap everything inside. For this offensive, the Germans would deploy their new weapons. Panthers, Tigers, Ferdinands, over 2,000 tanks. The largest concentration of armored forces Germany had ever assembled. This would be the decisive blow, the battle that would validate everything Hitler believed about German technological superiority. But the Soviets knew it was coming. Soviet intelligence was exceptional. The Lucy spy ring in Switzerland had sources inside German high command. They knew the attack date. They knew the axis of advance. They knew which units would be involved. Marshal Zhukov received this information in April and began preparing the defense. 300,000 civilians were mobilized to dig defenses. Trenches, tank traps, minefields. 5,000 kilometers of defensive positions. 8 defensive belts, each one designed to slow the German advance. The Soviets laid 1 million mines, maybe more. Nobody kept exact count. And they assembled tanks, thousands of them. The bulk of the Soviet armor was still T-34s, the same basic design from 1941, with improvements. Better manufacturing, more reliability, upgraded guns on some models. But fundamentally, it was the same tank that had shocked the Wehrmacht 2 years earlier. The Germans thought they'd solved the T-34 problem. The Panther was specifically designed to counter it. Sloped armor, high-velocity 75mm gun, superior optics. The Tiger had an 88mm gun that could kill a T-34 at 2,000 meters. The Ferdinand mounted the same gun in a heavily armored casemate. On paper, the Germans had the advantage. Better tanks, better training, better doctrine. They'd been fighting this war for 4 years. The Wehrmacht was the most experienced military force on the planet. The attack began July 5, 1943. It didn't go according to plan. The Soviets had pre-sighted their artillery on the German assembly areas. At 3:30 in the morning, Soviet guns opened fire, thousands of them. The bombardment lasted an hour. German units took casualties before they even started advancing. When the attack finally began, the Panthers broke down. Transmission failures, engine fires. The design was rushed, not properly tested. Of the 200 Panthers deployed in the northern sector, fewer than 40 were operational by the end of day 1. The Ferdinands had no machine guns, just the main gun. Soviet infantry swarmed them with satchel charges and Molotov cocktails. The Ferdinands could kill tanks at incredible ranges, but couldn't defend themselves against soldiers on foot. Dozens were destroyed in close combat. The Tigers performed well, but there weren't enough of them, and they were heavy, slow. The summer heat and muddy terrain bogged them down. Fuel consumption was enormous. Supply lines couldn't keep up. The T-34s, meanwhile, were everywhere. The Soviets had learned from 1941. They didn't send them in piecemeal. They massed them, concentrated them, used them in coordinated waves that overwhelmed German defensive positions. The fighting was brutal. Villages changed hands 6 times in a single day. Artillery barrages turned entire grid squares into moonscapes. The sky was black with smoke. The ground shook from constant explosion. Men fought hand-to-hand in rubble and trenches while tanks dueled at point-blank range. By July 10th, the German advance had penetrated 12 kilometers. 12 kilometers in 5 days. At that rate, they'd reach Kursk sometime in August, if ever. The offensive was failing, but the Germans had one more card to play. 2nd SS Panzer Corps, commanded by Paul Hauser. 3 elite divisions. Leibstandarte, Das Reich, Totenkopf. The best equipped formations in the Wehrmacht. They had Tigers. They had Panthers that actually worked. They had veteran crews and aggressive commanders who knew how to exploit breakthroughs. They advanced toward a small rail junction called Prokhorovka. If they could take it, they'd unhinge the entire Soviet defensive line. The door to Kursk would be open. The Soviets knew this. Marshal Vatutin, commanding Voronezh Front, requested immediate reinforcement. Stavka released 5th Guards Tank Army under General Pavel Rotmistrov, 800 T-34s. The strategic reserve, everything the Soviets had left in this sector. Rotmistrov received his orders on July 10th. Attack Prokhorovka. Destroy the SS Panzer Corps. Do not let them break through. He had less than 48 hours to move his army into position. The 5th Guards had been held in reserve east of Prokhorovka. Moving them required a night march through territory that German reconnaissance aircraft constantly monitored. If the Germans spotted the movement, they'd call in the Luftwaffe. 800 tanks on roads at night with no air cover would be massacred. Rotmistrov ordered radio silent, no lights. Guides on foot led the columns. Tank commanders navigated by compass and dead reckoning. It was chaos. Tanks got lost, collided with each other in the darkness, through tracks, broke down. But by dawn on July 12th, most of 5th Guards was in position in the forests east of Prokhorovka. Rotmistrov climbed a small hill overlooking the battlefield. Below him stretched wheat fields, golden in the summer sun, beautiful, peaceful. In 2 hours, it would be hell. The plan was simple, aggressive, probably suicidal. The T-34's 76mm gun couldn't penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor. Not at long range. The Tigers could kill T-34s from 2 kilometers away. If Rotmistrov let the battle develop at range, his tanks would be destroyed before they could even engage. So he wouldn't fight at range. He'd close immediately, rush the German positions, get inside the Tigers' effective engagement distance. At close range, the T-34's speed and maneuverability gave it an advantage. The Tiger's slow turret traverse became a liability when Soviet tanks were circling it at 50 meters. It was a tactic born of desperation. It would work, or it wouldn't. Either way, a lot of men were about to die. At 8:30 in the morning, Rotmistrov gave the signal. Stal, si, frau, ni. Steel, steel, steel. The radio call flashed through 5th Guards Tank Army. 800 T-34s surged from the forest line and accelerated across the wheat fields toward the German positions. From his observation post, Rotmistrov watched them go. Hundreds of tanks in waves. The ground trembled. The air filled with the roar of engines. Dust clouds rose behind them. The Germans saw them coming. SS Obergruppenführer Paul Hausser couldn't believe what he was watching. Hundreds of Soviet tanks charging directly at his positions. It violated every principle of armored warfare. They'd be slaughtered. His Tigers and Panthers had clear fields of fire. This was exactly the kind of target German tank crews dreamed about. He ordered his units to engage. The Tigers opened fire at 1,800 meters. The 88mm guns were accurate at that range. Deadly. T-34s began exploding. Orange fireballs in the wheat, black smoke columns marking each kill. The German crews were good, very good. They could fire 6 rounds per minute. Each round could kill at this range, but the T-34s kept coming. The waves didn't slow down, didn't stop. Tank commanders knew that stopping meant dying. Their only chance was to close the distance, get into knife-fighting range where their guns could penetrate. At 1,200 meters, the Panther tanks joined in. Their 75mm guns were equally effective. More T-34s died. The wheat fields were becoming a graveyard, burning hulks, men on fire trying to escape their vehicles, the smell of diesel and burning flesh. The German crews were methodical, calm, professional. Target, fire, next target, fire. They'd trained for this. Each crew knew their job. Loaders worked like machines. Gunners made every shot count. At 800 meters, something changed. The distance was closing too fast. The T-34s were accelerating. The German crews could see the individual tanks now, see the commanders and the turrets, see the red stars painted on the hulls. There were too many of them, far too many. If these stories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. At 400 meters, the T-34s opened fire while still moving. Their shots were wild, inaccurate, but there were so many guns firing that some shells found targets. A Panther took a hit in the side, penetrated, brewed up. A Tiger's track was severed, immobilized. Soviet tanks swarmed it. At 200 meters, the battle became chaos. German tanks tried to reverse, create distance. But the Tigers and Panthers were slow in reverse. The T-34s were faster. They closed the gap, circled around, fired at the thinner side and rear armor. Soviet tank commanders who ran out of ammunition rammed German tanks, just drove straight into them at full speed. The collision would destroy both tanks, but it took a German tank out of the fight. Some Soviet crews did it deliberately, sacrificed themselves to create an opening for the tanks behind them. SS tank crews fought back viciously. At close range, the Panther's high-velocity guns could punch through multiple T-34s with a single shot. One Panther commander reported destroying 7 Soviet tanks in 3 minutes. His gunner never missed, but for every T-34 destroyed, 3 more appeared. The mathematics were brutal, unavoidable. The Soviets could trade losses at 3-1 and still win. The Germans couldn't. Artillery from both sides joined in. Soviet Katyusha rockets screamed overhead and detonated in the German rear areas. German Nebelwerfers returned fire. The wheat fields disappeared under smoke and dust. Visibility dropped to 50 meters. Tanks collided with each other. Friend and foe became indistinguishable. The fighting lasted 6 hours. By 2 in the afternoon, both sides were exhausted. Ammunition was running low. Engines were overheating. Crews were beyond physical limits. Men fought on adrenaline and fear, and the animal instinct to survive. Rotmistrov watched it all from his hill. He couldn't control the battle. No one could. It had become pure chaos. All he could do was feed in reserves where he saw the German line weakening. Keep the pressure on. Don't let them reorganize. Around 3 o'clock, the firing began to slack off. Individual tanks disengaged, pulled back to reload or refuel. The constant roar of gunfire became sporadic, then occasional, then stopped. The silence was worse than the noise. The battlefield was carpeted with destroyed tanks. Soviet, German, hundreds of them, maybe more. Exact counts were impossible. Many tanks had burned so completely that identification was impossible. The wheat fields were gone, replaced by churned mud and metal debris, shell craters, unexploded ammunition cooking off in burning tanks. The casualties were staggering. Soviet sources later claimed they'd destroyed over 400 German tanks. German records showed fewer than 100 lost. The truth was somewhere between. Record-keeping in the middle of combat is unreliable at best. What's undisputed is that the Germans didn't break through. The SS Panzer Corps took heavy losses and failed to take Prokhorovka. The offensive stalled, and Hitler made a decision that ended the battle. On July 13th, the day after Prokhorovka, the Western Allies landed in Sicily. Italy was collapsing. Hitler needed troops to defend the Mediterranean. He couldn't afford to keep bleeding tanks and men in Russia, when his southern flank was disintegrating. He ordered the offensive terminated. Units would withdraw to defensive positions. Operation Citadel was over. The Germans had failed. For the first time in the war, a major German offensive had been stopped cold without achieving its objectives. The Wehrmacht had been fought to a standstill by an enemy they'd considered inferior, and the T-34 had been central to that victory. Not because it was a better tank than the Tiger or Panther in a one-on-one fight. It wasn't. German tanks had superior armor, superior guns, superior optics. A Tiger crew with good positioning could massacre T-34s all day long. But war isn't a duel. It's not about individual tank performance. It's about mass production, logistics, crew training, tactical deployment, and the will to accept losses to achieve victory. The Soviets built T-34s by the tens of thousands. Fast, cheap, reliable enough. They trained crews quickly, not to German standards, but good enough. They concentrated their tanks where they mattered most. And they were willing to trade 3 T-34s for 1 Tiger because they had 3 T-34s to trade, and the Germans didn't have another Tiger. German General Heinz Guderian understood this. In his memoirs, he wrote about the shock of encountering the T-34 in 1941, how it forced a complete re-evaluation of German tank doctrine, how the Germans spent 2 years developing weapons to counter it, and how, at Kursk, even with those new weapons, they still couldn't win. He attributed it to several factors: Soviet numerical superiority, Soviet willingness to accept casualties that would have broken any Western army, Soviet intelligence that gave them perfect knowledge of German plans, Soviet defensive engineering that created obstacles the Germans couldn't overcome quickly. But underlying all of it was the T-34, a tank design created in 1939 that remained effective through 1945. That forced the Germans to completely redesign their armored forces. That killed more German tanks than any other weapon system. That became the symbol of Soviet resistance and ultimate victory. After Kursk, the strategic initiative on the Eastern Front passed to the Soviets permanently. The Germans never launched another major offensive. They fought defensive battles for the next 2 years, retreating, losing ground, bleeding strength in a war of attrition they couldn't win. The T-34 was there for all of it, improved over time. The T-34-85 variant appeared in early 1944 with a bigger gun and better armor. But the basic design remained: sloped armor, wide tracks, diesel engine. The fundamentals that made it revolutionary in 1941 still worked in 1945. Soviet factories produced 57,000 T-34s during the war, more than any other tank in history. They were simple enough that workers with minimal training could build them, robust enough that crews with minimal training could operate them, effective enough that they could fight German armor on relatively equal terms. The Germans never matched that production. The Tiger was a masterpiece of engineering, but Germany built fewer than 1,800 of them. They were complex, expensive, difficult to maintain, required highly trained crews and extensive support infrastructure. Magnificent weapons in the right circumstances. But those circumstances rarely existed on the Eastern Front after 1943. The Panther was better, faster production, more reliable. By late war, it was arguably the best tank design Germany produced, but they still couldn't build enough of them. The Soviets were producing T-34s faster than Germany could destroy them. And that's the real story of the T-34 at Kursk. Not a tale of technological superiority. Not a story of brilliant tactics or heroic sacrifice, though those elements existed. It's a story about industrial capacity, about designing weapons for mass production rather than perfection, about accepting good enough when perfect is too expensive and takes too long. Hitler mocked Soviet armor in 1941, called it primitive, dismissed reports of the T-34's capabilities as exaggeration. By 1942, he was openly lamenting that he'd underestimated Soviet tank production. By 1943 at Kursk, his forces were being ground down by the same tanks he'd once dismissed. The men who fought at Prokhorovka saw it from ground level. German crews in their Tigers and Panthers, watching waves of T-34s coming at them through the smoke, knowing they could kill dozens of them, knowing it wouldn't matter because dozens more were coming, fighting with skill and courage until their ammunition ran out, or their tank was hit, or they were overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Soviet crews in their T-34s, charging into fields of fire that turned their comrades into burning steel coffins, knowing that most of them wouldn't survive, doing it anyway because the orders said attack and because stopping meant dying, and because maybe, just maybe, they'd get close enough to kill a German tank before their own was destroyed. The survivors on both sides spoke of Prokhorovka with a kind of horror. The largest tank battle in history. Over 1,500 armored vehicles, in an area 7 kilometers square. The noise was indescribable. The violence was absolute. Men climbed out of burning tanks and were crushed by other tanks. Ammunition explosions threw turrets 50 meters into the air. Crews burned alive inside steel ovens they couldn't escape. One German tanker, interviewed decades later, said he still had nightmares about it. The sound of shells hitting his tank, the vibration of the engine, the smell of cordite and diesel smoke, the sight of Soviet tanks burning, and more Soviet tanks coming and more after that, and knowing that eventually his luck would run out. A Soviet tank commander described the moment his T-34 took a hit from a Tiger. The shell penetrated the hull, killed his driver instantly, set the ammunition on fire. He and his gunner bailed out through the turret hatch. His clothes were on fire. He rolled in the dirt to put it out, got up, looked around, saw another T-34 with its commander dead in the hatch, climbed into it, took command, kept fighting, because that's what you did. You fought until you died or until the battle ended, whichever came first. These men weren't statistics. They were sons and fathers and brothers. They had names and families and futures that ended in those wheat fields outside Prokhorovka, German and Soviet alike. The tank you died in didn't matter much when the shells started flying. But in the broader strategic sense, the tanks mattered enormously. The Germans needed victory at Kursk to stabilize the Eastern Front. They committed their best forces, used their newest weapons, planned meticulously, executed professionally, and they failed because the Soviets had more tanks and were willing to use them regardless of cost. That willingness came from the T-34. Without it, the Soviets couldn't have fought the way they did. They couldn't have absorbed the losses and kept attacking. The T-34 gave them the ability to trade metal and men for territory and time, to fight a war of attrition on terms that favored their industrial capacity over German tactical skill. The aftermath of Prokhorovka was apocalyptic. Medical units were overwhelmed with burned and wounded tankers. Salvage teams spent weeks recovering damaged tanks and clearing the battlefield. Many tanks were never recovered. They were buried where they died. The wheat fields became graveyard. Prokhorovka is remembered as a Soviet victory, and it was. They stopped the German offensive, held the line, prevented the breakthrough, but the cost was staggering. 5th Guards tank army was effectively destroyed as a fighting force. Most of Rotmistrov's tanks were lost. Many of his best crews died. Yet within weeks, the losses were replaced. New T-34s arrived from the factory. New crews were trained. 5th Guards was reconstituted and returned to combat. Because the Soviet system could absorb those losses, could replace them, could keep fighting. The Germans couldn't. Every Tiger lost at Kursk was irreplaceable. Every experienced crew killed was a loss that couldn't be made good. German tank strength declined steadily after Kursk, not because Soviet tanks were better, but because the Soviets could replace their losses and the Germans couldn't. That's the legacy of the T-34 at Kursk. Not invincibility, not technological superiority, just adequate performance in sufficient numbers to overwhelm an enemy who had better weapons but couldn't produce enough of them. It's a lesson that military planners still study, the balance between quality and quantity, the value of a weapon system that's good enough but can be mass-produced versus one that's excellent but takes too long to build, the importance of logistics and industrial capacity in modern warfare. Hitler learned that lesson too late. By the time he realized the scale of Soviet tank production, Germany couldn't catch up. The factories were bombed, the resources were depleted, the skilled workers were in uniform or dead. German tank production peaked in 1944 and then declined as the Reich collapsed. Soviet tank production kept increasing. By 1945, they were building more T-34s in a month than Germany built of all tank types. The Eastern Front became a steamroller. Soviet tank armies pushed westward. Berlin fell in May 1945 under assault by thousands of T-34s. The tank that shocked the Wehrmacht in 1941 ended the war in the ruins of the Reichstag. Soldiers from the Red Army posed for photographs on their T-34s amid the rubble of Hitler's capital. The symbolism was perfect. The weapon Hitler had dismissed as primitive Soviet junk had helped destroy his empire, but we should remember the men who died in those tanks. German crews who fought with skill and courage in a cause that didn't deserve them. Soviet crews who fought with desperate determination to defend their homeland. Young men, most of them. Boys, really. Thrown into steel boxes and told to kill or be killed. The tank battles of World War II were mechanized slaughter on a scale the world had never seen. Kursk was the apex of that horror. Thousands of men dying in a single afternoon in a battle that changed nothing strategically, but cost everything personally to those who fought it. The T-34 survived the war, remained in production for years afterward, served in conflicts around the world, Korea, the Middle East, Africa, Anywhere Soviet influence extended, T-34s appeared. The design was that good, that flexible, that reliable. But at Prokhorovka, on that summer day in 1943, it wasn't about design specifications or production numbers. It was about men fighting and dying in machines that turned them into targets. About the courage it took to climb into a tank, knowing you probably wouldn't climb out. About the bond between crew members who depended on each other absolutely because no one else could help them. One Soviet veteran, interviewed in the 1980s, was asked what he remembered most about Prokhorovka. He thought for a long moment. Then he said, "The silence afterward, when the guns finally stopped, and you realized you were still alive, and you looked around at all the burning tanks and all the bodies, and you wondered why you lived when so many didn't. I never found an answer to that question. That's the human cost of mechanized warfare, the random brutality of it, the way survival often comes down to luck rather than skill. The way the machines we build to protect us become steel coffins when the other side's machines are better or luckier or more numerous. The T-34 wasn't just a tank, it was a weapon system that changed how wars were fought. It proved that quantity has a quality all its own, that industrial capacity matters as much as tactical brilliance, that a good design, well executed and mass-produced, can overwhelm a perfect design that can't be built fast enough. Hitler learned that lesson in the wheat fields outside Kursk. He'd dismiss Soviet armor as inferior. He'd mock the T-34. He'd believe German engineering would always prevail. And then, in one afternoon, he watched his finest divisions get chewed up by tanks he'd once considered primitive. The battle didn't end the war. That took 2 more years. But it ended any hope Germany had of victory in the east. From Kursk forward, the Wehrmacht was in retreat, fighting, delaying actions, trading space for time, hoping for a miracle that never came. The T-34 was there for all of it, pushing westward, breaking German defensive lines, overwhelming German positions through sheer weight of numbers. Not perfect, never perfect, but good enough. And there were enough of them, and that made all the difference. The technical specifications tell part of the story. The T-34 weighed 26 tons. The Tiger weighed 56 tons. The T-34 had a 76mm gun that could penetrate 80mm of armor at 500 meters. The Tiger had an 88mm gun that could penetrate 120mm at 1,000 meters. On paper, the Tiger was superior in every measurable way. But wars aren't fought on paper. The T-34 cost 30,000 man-hours to produce. The Tiger cost 300,000. A Soviet factory could build 10 T-34s in the time it took a German factory to build 1 Tiger. That ratio mattered more than armor thickness or gun penetration. The T-34's diesel engine used less fuel and was less likely to catch fire. German tankers called their gasoline-powered Panzers Ronsons after the cigarette lighter because they lit up so easily when hit. Soviet tankers had their own dark humor about their tanks, but engine fires weren't part of it. The T-34's wide tracks gave it lower ground pressure. It could cross terrain that would bog down German tanks. Mud, snow, soft ground. The Eastern Front was mostly bad terrain, and the T-34 handled it better than anything the Germans had. These advantages seemed small individually. Put together, they created a weapon system that fit the war being fought, not the war military theorists imagined. The actual war, muddy, chaotic, industrial. A war where the side that could produce more tanks and keep them running would eventually win. German military doctrine emphasized quality over quantity, superior training, superior equipment, superior tactics. The idea that one highly trained German soldier was worth 10 poorly trained enemy soldiers. That belief was baked into everything the Wehrmacht did. It worked brilliantly in Poland, in France, in the early months of Barbarossa. German forces achieved victories that seemed impossible, outmaneuvered enemies with superior numbers, destroyed armies that should have crushed them, made the impossible look routine. But it had a fatal flaw. It didn't scale. You can't train replacements faster than you lose experienced soldiers. You can't build complex weapon systems faster than they're destroyed. Germany had 100 million people. The Soviet Union had 200 million. Simple mathematics dictated the outcome once the war became attritional. The Soviets understood this, not from brilliant strategic insight. They learned it through brutal experience. In 1941, they lost millions of soldiers and thousands of tanks. Their armies were encircled and destroyed. Their tactics were primitive. Their coordination was terrible, but they didn't quit. They fell back, rebuilt, adapted. By 1942, Soviet tactics had improved dramatically. By 1943, they were fighting the Germans on even terms. Not because individual Soviet soldiers were better trained. They weren't. But because the Soviet system could absorb losses and keep functioning while the German system couldn't. The T-34 exemplified this approach. It wasn't the best tank. It was a good enough tank that could be built in huge numbers by workers who didn't need years of training, operated by crews who could learn the basics in weeks, maintained in the field with simple tools, designed from the start to be a mass production weapon. German tanks evolved in the opposite direction. Each new model was more complex, more powerful, more expensive, required more training to operate effectively. The Tiger needed a specialist crew. The Panther needed careful maintenance. The Ferdinand needed support vehicles and extensive logistics. These tanks were magnificent, genuinely impressive machines. But they were dinosaurs, perfectly adapted to a war that no longer existed. A war of quick victories and decisive battles. The war Germany needed to fight. The war they were actually fighting was different. Long, grinding, industrial. A war of logistics and production capacity. A war where having 10 adequate tanks beat having one perfect tank, because the 10 adequate tanks could be in 10 places at once, and the one perfect tank could only be in one place. At Kursk, this dynamic reached its logical conclusion. The Germans brought their best: Panthers, Tigers, Ferdinands, veteran crews, excellent tactics, air support, artillery, everything military theory said should produce victory. The Soviets brought T-34s, lots of them, supported by infantry and artillery and aircraft, dug into prepared positions, with intelligence that told them exactly where the Germans would attack, and a willingness to trade losses that would have horrified any Western army. The result was predictable in hindsight, but in the moment, German commanders couldn't believe they were losing. Their tanks were better, their crews were better, their tactics were better. They were doing everything right according to their doctrine, and it didn't matter, because the Soviets had more tanks. Because Soviet factories could replace losses faster than German tanks could inflict them. Because the strategic initiative had shifted, and the Germans were fighting the wrong kind of war with the wrong kind of weapons. Prokhorovka crystallized all of this. German tankers fought magnificently, destroyed hundreds of Soviet tanks, maintained discipline under impossible pressure, did everything their training prepared them for. They lost anyway, not because they failed, because the task was impossible. You can't win a battle of attrition when you're outnumbered 3-1 and your enemy doesn't care about losses. The mathematics are unforgiving. Soviet casualties at Prokhorovka were enormous. Some estimates put Soviet tank losses at over 600. German losses were around 60 tanks destroyed, maybe 100 damaged. By any tactical measure, the Germans won. They had a better kill ratio, inflicted more damage, maintained unit cohesion. But they didn't achieve their objective. They didn't break through. Didn't take Prokhorovka, didn't unhinge the Soviet defensive line. Strategic failure despite tactical success. The Soviets lost more tanks but held the ground. Within days, their losses were replaced. Fifth Guard's tank army was rebuilt. The Germans couldn't replace their losses. Every Tiger destroyed was gone forever. Every experienced crew killed was irreplaceable. This pattern repeated across the Eastern Front after Kursk. Germans winning tactically, Soviets winning strategically, German forces retreating toward Berlin while winning most of the battles they fought, losing the war one victory at a time. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. German soldiers fought with incredible courage and skill, held impossible positions, conducted brilliant tactical withdrawals, made the Soviets pay for every kilometer. It didn't matter. The Red Army kept coming, kept pushing, kept taking casualties and replacing them and pushing again. The industrial base in the Urals produced tanks faster than the Germans could destroy them. American Lend-Lease provided trucks and radios and food and fuel. The Soviet Union mobilized its entire society for war in a way Germany never matched. By late 1943, the outcome was inevitable. The only question was how long it would take. How many more soldiers would die? How much more destruction would occur before Germany surrendered or was completely destroyed? The T-34 remained the backbone of Soviet armored forces through all of it. Upgraded to the T-34-85 model in early 1944. Better gun, better armor, better fighting capability, but still fundamentally the same design. Still cheap to produce, still reliable, still adequate for the job. German intelligence officers studied captured T-34s constantly, looking for weaknesses, ways to counter them, better tactics. Every report reached the same conclusion. The T-34 isn't exceptional in any single area, but the combination of characteristics makes it highly effective, and there are so many of them. That last point was what really mattered, the quantity. One German report from late 1943 estimated that for every German tank on the Eastern Front, the Soviets had 5, and the disparity was growing. German tank production was constrained by Allied bombing, raw material shortages, labor shortages as men were drafted into combat units. The decision to produce multiple tank types simultaneously instead of standardizing on one design. Every factor that could go wrong did go wrong. Soviet tank production faced different problems but solved them better. Factories were moved east, out of bombing range. Production was standardized. Workers were trained quickly in specialized tasks. Quality control was minimal but adequate. Tanks rolled off assembly lines with cosmoline still on them and drove straight to the front. American industrial advisors who visited Soviet tank factories were horrified at the working conditions and quality standards. But they had to admit the system worked. The Soviets were producing tanks at rates American factories couldn't match despite having better equipment and more resources. The secret was ruthless simplification. Every design decision prioritized production speed over performance. If a component didn't directly contribute to the tank's ability to move and shoot, it was eliminated. Crew comfort didn't matter. Reliability beyond 100 engine hours didn't matter. Anything that slowed production didn't matter. This created tanks that were miserable to operate. Noisy, cramped, uncomfortable, mechanically crude, prone to breakdowns. Soviet tank crews hated them, but they also knew the tanks worked, would run when needed, could be repaired with simple tools, got the job done. German tankers had the opposite experience. Their tanks were comfortable, quiet, mechanically sophisticated, a pleasure to operate when they worked properly, but they broke down constantly, needed specialized tools to repair, required trained mechanics who weren't always available, often spent more time in maintenance than in combat. The stereotype of German efficiency versus Soviet brutality had it backwards when it came to tanks. Soviet tank production was ruthlessly efficient. German tank production was a bureaucratic nightmare of competing designs and resource allocation battles. This became obvious during Operation Citadel planning. Hitler kept delaying the offensive to wait for more Panthers and Tigers. Every delay gave the Soviets more time to prepare, more time to build defenses, more time to produce T-34s. By the time the offensive finally launched in July, the window of opportunity had closed. Some German generals understood this. Model argued against the offensive. Guderian argued for canceling it. Manstein wanted to attack in May before Soviet defenses were complete. Hitler overruled them all, waited for his wonder weapons, convinced that superior German technology would overcome Soviet numbers. Kursk proved him wrong. The wonder weapons weren't wonderful enough. The Panthers broke down. The Ferdinands were vulnerable to infantry. The Tigers were too few and too slow. German technological superiority, which had seemed so decisive in 1940 and 41, couldn't overcome Soviet industrial capacity in 1943. The T-34 symbolized everything Hitler misunderstood about the war. He saw it as a primitive Soviet tank, crude, poorly made, no match for German engineering. What he failed to understand was that the T-34 wasn't designed to be a match for German tanks in individual combat. It was designed to be produced in numbers that would overwhelm German tanks through sheer mass. The Soviet approach to armored warfare was fundamentally different from the German approach. Germans thought of tanks as elite weapons, concentrated in specialized Panzer divisions, carefully husbanded, used for decisive breakthroughs, the tip of the spear. Soviets thought of tanks as industrial products, mass-produced, distributed widely, used aggressively even at high cost, expendable. The sledgehammer you used to break down the door. Both approaches worked in the right circumstances. German armor doctrine achieved stunning victories in Poland and France. Soviet armor doctrine ground Germany into defeat on the Eastern Front. The difference was the strategic context. Poland and France were short wars, limited objectives, achieve victory quickly before industrial capacity becomes decisive. Perfect for German doctrine. The Eastern Front was a long war, unlimited objective. Ultimate victory depends on industrial capacity. Perfect for Soviet doctrine. Hitler never accepted this. He kept believing that one more offensive, one more technological breakthrough, one more wonder weapon would turn the tide. The jet fighter, the V-2 rocket, the King Tiger tank, each one would be the decisive advantage that changed everything. None of them were. Because the fundamental problem wasn't technology, it was resources. Germany was running out. The Soviet Union wasn't. No amount of technological sophistication could overcome that reality. After Kursk, German commanders on the Eastern Front understood they'd lost. They fought defensive battles, conducted strategic retreats, tried to inflict maximum casualties while preserving their own forces, bought time for Germany to negotiate a settlement or for some miracle to save them. The miracle never came. The Soviets kept attacking, kept pushing, kept taking casualties that would have broken any other army, drove toward Berlin with remorseless inevitability. The T-34 led the way, not because it was the best tank, because there were so many of them, and because Soviet tank crews had learned to use them effectively. By late war, Soviet armored tactics were sophisticated. Coordinated combined arms operations, deep penetrations, encirclements. Everything the Germans had done to them in 1941, they were doing back. German soldiers called it Russisch Dampfwalze, the Russian steamroller. Unstoppable, implacable, crushing everything in its path through sheer weight. The T-34 was the physical embodiment of that steamroller, thousands of them advancing across the plains, breaking through defensive lines, exploiting breakthroughs, destroying German armies that tried to stand and fight. Some German units fought to annihilation, others surrendered. Most retreated when they could, fought when they couldn't retreat, and died when they couldn't fight anymore. The Eastern Front in 1944 and 45 was apocalyptic. Millions of casualties, entire armies destroyed, cities reduced to rubble. The kind of warfare that destroys not just soldiers, but entire societies. The weight of German defeat at Kursk cannot be overstated. Strategic planners in Berlin had calculated that Operation Citadel would shorten the front line by 160 kilometers, would free up 15 divisions for other operations, would destroy Soviet offensive capability for at least 6 months, would give Germany time to rebuild its forces and possibly negotiate a favorable peace. None of it happened. The front line stayed where it was. No divisions were freed up. Soviet offensive capability wasn't destroyed. Within weeks of Kursk ending, the Red Army launched multiple offensives that drove the Germans back across a broad front. Germany had no time to rebuild, no breathing room, no chance to negotiate anything except unconditional surrender. Military historians debate whether Kursk was truly the turning point of the Eastern Front War, or if that distinction belongs to Stalingrad. The argument misses the point. Stalingrad destroyed the German Sixth Army. Kursk destroyed German offensive capability. Both were necessary. Neither was sufficient alone. Together, they doomed Germany in the East. Hitler understood this at some level. His behavior after Kursk became increasingly erratic. He fired competent generals and replaced them with yes-men, made strategic decisions based on intuition rather than intelligence, refused to authorize tactical retreats that might have saved entire armies. The man who'd been a shrewd political operator in the 1930s became a delusional megalomaniac, demanding miracles from generals who had no miracles to give. The German general staff knew the war was lost after Kursk. They couldn't say so openly. That would be defeatism, punishable by death. But in private conversations, in coded language, in official reports, in decisions about resource allocation, they acted like men who knew defeat was inevitable and were just trying to delay it. Some generals tried to kill Hitler. The July 20th, 1944 bomb plot came closest to succeeding. If it had worked, Germany might have negotiated a conditional surrender, saved some cities from destruction, prevented some atrocities. But it failed. Hitler survived. The war ground on for another 10 months of pointless slaughter. The T-34 was there for all of it. Operation Bagration in June 1944 destroyed Army Group Center. Over 400,000 German casualties. Worse than Stalingrad. Soviet tank armies spearheaded the offensive. Thousands of T-34s punching through German defenses, encircling entire divisions, moving so fast that German forces couldn't form coherent defensive lines. The Vistula-Oder offensive in January 1945 pushed from Poland to within striking distance of Berlin. 450 kilometers in 3 weeks. Fastest sustained advance of the entire war. Again, T-34s led the way. Soviet tank commanders had learned deep operations. How to exploit breakthroughs. How to keep moving even when logistics lagged. How to overwhelm German defensive positions through speed and mass. The final battle for Berlin in April and May 1945 saw T-34s fighting in urban terrain they weren't designed for. Street fighting, close quarters. Soviet tankers adapted, used their tanks as mobile artillery, blasted buildings where German defenders were hiding, provided cover for advancing infantry, took heavy losses but kept pushing forward. The famous photograph of Soviet soldiers raising the flag over the Reichstag shows T-34s in the background, parked amid rubble, battle-scarred, some still burning. The visual symbolism is perfect. The weapon Hitler had mocked in 1941 ended the war in the ruins of his capital in 1945. But we should talk about what it cost, the human price of Soviet victory. Soviet casualties in World War II are almost incomprehensible. Estimates range from 24 to 27 million dead. More than half were civilians, murdered, starved, worked to death. The scale of suffering defies imagination. Soviet tank crews suffered catastrophically high casualty rates. A T-34 commander had an average life expectancy of 6 to 8 weeks in combat. Some lived longer. Many died on their first mission. The replacement rate for tank crews was staggering. Entire armies' worth of men were trained, sent to the front, and killed, replaced by new crews who were trained, sent to the front, and killed. The cycle repeated for 4 years. This isn't heroic. It's industrial-scale death, the machinery of war consuming human beings and producing corpses. The T-34 enabled Soviet victory, but that victory was purchased with blood on a scale that makes victory feel hollow. Soviet propaganda didn't dwell on this. Films and posters showed heroic tankers defeating fascism, clean deaths, noble sacrifices. The reality was messier. Men burning alive in steel coffins. Bodies so badly burned they couldn't be identified. Crews that survived one battle being thrown into the next battle with no rest, no time to process trauma, no chance to recover. The psychological cost was enormous. Post-traumatic stress wasn't recognized as a medical condition in the Soviet Union during the war. Men who broke down mentally were sometimes shot as cowards, sometimes sent to penal battalions where they were used as expendable troops for suicide missions, sometimes just ignored until they died or recovered on their own. Soviet tankers who survived the war often had severe trauma, nightmares, flashbacks, inability to function in civilian life. The Soviet state provided minimal support. Veterans were expected to move on, rebuild, forget the horror and focus on rebuilding the country. Many couldn't. Alcoholism was rampant among veterans. Domestic violence, suicide. The cost of victory included millions of broken men who came home physically intact but psychologically destroyed. This applies to veterans of all nations, but Soviet veterans had it particularly hard because their losses were so much higher and their support system so much weaker. One Soviet tanker, interviewed in the 1990s after the Soviet Union collapsed, described his experience. He'd commanded a T-34 from Kursk to Berlin, survived hundreds of engagements, lost 3 tanks. Each time he was the only crew member to survive. He watched 12 men die in those 3 tanks, all of them his responsibility, all of them haunting him decades later. He described the moment his first tank was hit near Kharkov in August 1943. German tank destroyer, armor-piercing round through the hull, killed the driver and loader instantly, set ammunition on fire. He and the gunner bailed out. The gunner's clothes were on fire. He rolled on the ground screaming. The interviewer asked if the gunner survived. The veteran stared at her for a full minute, then said, "What do you think?" His second tank was destroyed at Königsberg in April 1945. Different crew. All of them fresh replacements. Kids. 18, 19 years old. None of them had been in combat before. They were excited, thought they'd missed the war. One of them asked if they'd get to Berlin. The veteran told him not to worry about Berlin. Worry about surviving today. They didn't survive today. German Panther ambushed them. One shot, through the turret, killed everyone but the veteran. He was in the driver's position, protected by the engine block, climbed out through the escape hatch, looked back at his tank, saw the turret was gone, just gone, blown off the hull. He could see inside, see what was left of his crew. He got another tank, a fresh T-34-85, the latest model, better gun, better armor. It didn't save his third crew. They were destroyed outside Berlin by a German boy with a Panzerfaust, 14 years old, hiding in rubble, waited until the T-34 was close, fired from 10 meters. The rocket penetrated the side armor, killed everyone but the veteran again. He survived 3 destroyed tanks, lost 12 crew members, killed Germans, watched Germans kill his friends, liberated Soviet territory from occupation, helped destroy Nazi Germany, received medals, commendations, recognition as a hero of the Soviet Union. And 40 years later, he told an interviewer that he wished he'd died in one of those tanks, because living with the memories was worse than death, because survivor's guilt had eaten away at him for decades, because he couldn't understand why he lived when 12 better men died. That's the human cost of the T-34. Not just the German soldiers it killed, the Soviet soldiers it failed to protect, the crews who died in tanks that were adequate but not invulnerable, who paid with their lives for Soviet strategic choices about quantity over quality. Was it worth it? From a strategic perspective, yes. Soviet victory saved millions from Nazi genocide, ended the Holocaust, destroyed a regime that represented evil in its purest form. The cost was terrible, but the alternative would have been worse. From an individual perspective, the question is harder. If you're the veteran who survived 3 tanks and lost 12 crew members, was it worth it? If you're the widow of a tank commander who died at Prokhorovka, was it worth it? If you're the mother who received a letter saying her son didn't make it out of his burning T-34, was it worth it? These questions don't have good answers. War requires sacrifices that seem necessary at the strategic level and unbearable at the personal level. Both things can be true simultaneously. Victory can be necessary and the cost of victory can be too high. These aren't contradictions. They're the tragedy of war. The Germans at Kursk faced similar calculations. Their defeat was deserved. They'd invaded the Soviet Union. committed atrocities, pursued genocidal policies. German defeat was morally necessary. But the individual German soldiers at Prokhorovka didn't make those policy decisions. Most of them were conscripts, drafted, sent to Russia, told they were defending Germany from Bolshevism. They fought with courage, died with courage. Their courage doesn't excuse the Nazi regime, but it existed, deserves acknowledgement even while condemning the cause they fought for. One account from a German Tiger commander illustrates this complexity. He survived Prokhorovka, fought through the retreat across Russia, ended up in a POW camp in Siberia, returned to Germany in 1951, wrote a memoir in the 1960s. He described Prokhorovka as the day he understood Germany would lose the war, not because of any strategic insight, because of what he saw. Hundreds of Soviet tanks coming at him, destroying dozens of them, more appearing, always more, an endless stream of brown metal and red stars. He wrote, "I killed 17 Soviet tanks that day, maybe more. I lost count. Each kill should have mattered. Each one was an enemy vehicle destroyed, an enemy crew killed, a small victory in the larger battle. But they kept coming. For every tank I destroyed, 2 more appeared. I realized then that we couldn't win, not against an enemy who could replace losses faster than we could inflict them. I was fighting a battle I couldn't lose tactically and couldn't win strategically. The mathematics were impossible." He survived the war, lost friends, lost comrades, spent 6 years in Soviet captivity, returned to a Germany that had been destroyed and divided, spent the rest of his life grappling with what he'd done, the men he'd killed, the cause he'd fought for, the complicity and atrocities he'd witnessed but couldn't stop. His memoir doesn't excuse anything, doesn't minimize German crimes, but it provides a window into how individual soldiers experienced the war, the cognitive dissonance of fighting courageously for an evil cause, the realization that you're on the wrong side of history, the inability to stop fighting because stopping means death or worse. These moral complexities are uncomfortable. War narratives prefer clean stories, heroes and villains, good versus evil. The reality is messier. Courage can exist in service of evil. Evil can be committed by ordinary people who think they're doing their duty. Victory doesn't erase the cost paid to achieve it. The T-34 at Kursk represents all of this, a weapon that enabled Soviet victory at terrible human cost. A weapon that defeated German armor through industrial might rather than tactical superiority. A weapon that became a symbol of both liberation and oppression depending on your perspective and experience. The technical specifications don't capture this. Neither do tactical analyses. You have to look at the human stories. The men who crewed the tanks, the men who faced them, the choices they made, the costs they paid, the trauma they carried, the ways the war shaped their lives and the lives of their families. This isn't just history, it's memory, living memory for some. The last World War II veterans are dying now. In a few years, no one will be alive who remembers Prokhorovka firsthand. The stories will remain, but the living connection will be gone. That's why these stories matter. Why we should remember not just the strategic outcomes, but the human experiences, the courage and fear and death and survival, the ways war tests people and breaks them and occasionally ennobles them, the cost of victory and the price of defeat. The T-34 killed a lot of men, German men mostly, but also Soviet men who died in tanks that couldn't protect them well enough. Millions of men across 4 years of brutal industrial warfare. Each death was a person, someone's son, someone's brother, someone's father, someone who had hopes and dreams and a life that ended violently in circumstances they didn't choose. Numbers obscure this. 27 million Soviet dead, 5 million German military dead. These numbers are so large they lose meaning. No one can really comprehend 27 million deaths. The human mind isn't designed to process loss on that scale. But we can comprehend individual stories. The veteran who survived 3 tanks, the German commander who understood at Prokhorovka that his side would lose, the Soviet infantry private who watched the battle from a trench and spent the rest of his life teaching school children about the cost of war. These stories make the numbers real, connect the abstract to the concrete, help us understand what war actually means at the human level, not strategies and tactics and equipment specification. People, making choices, facing death, sometimes surviving, often not. If these memories of sacrifice resonate with you, please consider liking this video, leaving a comment with your thoughts, and subscribing to ensure these stories are never forgotten. The legacy of the T-34 extends beyond World War II. The design influenced tank development for decades. The Soviets continued producing variants through the 1950s, exported them to allies around the world. T-34s fought in Korea, the Middle East, Africa, Asia, anywhere Soviet influence extended. The tank's longevity proves the soundness of the basic design. Sloped armor, diesel engine, wide tracks, good balance of firepower, protection, and mobility. These principles remain relevant in modern tank design. The T-34 didn't invent these features, but it combined them more effectively than any previous tank. American and British tank designers studied captured T-34s during and after the war, incorporated lessons into their own designs. The American M26 Pershing borrowed some features from the T-34. The British Centurion reflected similar design philosophy. Post-war NATO tank doctrine was influenced by Soviet mass production approaches pioneered with the T-34. Soviet tank design evolved from the T-34 through the T-44, T-54, T-55, T-62, T-64, T-72, T-80, and finally, the T-90. Each generation reflected lessons learned from the previous generation, but the lineage back to the T-34 is clear. The basic philosophy, adequate performance in large numbers, persisted through the Cold War and beyond. Western tank design took a different path. American M1 Abrams, German Leopard 2, British Challenger. These tanks emphasize quality over quantity, high performance, sophisticated systems, expensive, difficult to produce in large numbers. The opposite of the T-34 philosophy. Both approaches have merit. The debate continues in military circles. Quality versus quantity. High-tech versus simple and reliable. Small numbers of expensive weapons versus large numbers of adequate weapons. The answer depends on the war you're fighting and the resources you have. For the Soviet Union in World War II, the T-34 approach was correct. They had the industrial capacity for mass production. They faced an enemy they could overwhelm through numbers. They had the population to sustain catastrophic casualty rates. The T-34 fit their needs perfectly. For the United States in the Cold War and beyond, the high-quality approach made sense. Smaller population, higher industrial sophistication, emphasis on technology and training over raw numbers, different circumstances requiring different solutions. Neither approach is objectively superior. Context matters. The T-34 succeeded in its context, failed in others. North Korean T-34s were massacred by American M26 Pershings in Korea. Arab T-34s were destroyed by Israeli Shermans in 1948. The same tank that dominated the Eastern Front in World War II struggled in different conflicts against different opponents.